naravno da sam upoznala nas i bombardovanje.
Te vojske na ova područja, nismo mogli slobodno i normalno da se kreće.
NATO je zaustavio rat ovdje u Bosni, stoga ja gledam to pozitivno.
Već da je, mogli su zaustaviti rat, mogli su zaustaviti ovaj kraj, mogli su zaustaviti Srebrenicu, mogli su sve zaustaviti nakon 4 dana, a ne nakon 4 godine, 5.
Njih nema, Bog zna šta bilo.
Between March 1992 and December 1995, Bosnian Muslims, often known as Bosniaks, Bosnian Croats and Bosnian Serbs fought each other in Europe's bloodiest conflict since the end of the Second World War.
During the war, Bosnia and Herzegovina actually had almost as many as 5 or more conflicts going on at the same time.
Over 100,000 people died, 2.3 million fled their homes, and more than 1 million took refuge abroad. Despite the decisive role that NATO came to play in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the alliance was slow to join international efforts to end the fighting.
Why do we get involved? Mainly not really for the right strategic reason, not so much because we saw our interests in intervening in Yugoslavia to put a stop to the bloodshed, but more because the United Nations in 1993 came knocking on our door. They needed NATO's assistance with ships in the Adriatic to form a kind of naval blockade to stop the weapons coming in.
NATO aircraft were also called upon to enforce a no-fly zone over the country and to provide air support to the UN peacekeeping force UNPROFOR. NATO and UN commanders both had to agree before air operations could be carried out. In 1994, NATO fighters engaged in airstrikes several times, often in support of UN peacekeepers who were under attack.
All those people engaged in the war, at the most they wanted you to do was to help them, and the least they wanted you to do was not get in their way. So finally you finished up as a result in a position of either being a hostage or a shield to one or other or both factions.
The situation on the ground continued to deteriorate in the spring and summer of 1995. Hundreds of peacekeepers had been taken hostage, and the complete withdrawal of UN forces was a real possibility. There was no peace to keep, but the UN force had neither the mandate nor the capabilities to go beyond classical peacekeeping. A more robust approach was required. At the end of June, an Anglo-Dutch-French rapid reaction force was deployed to a base outside Sarajevo, but many at NATO believed that the alliance could and should do more to end the war. The massacre of some 8,000 Bosniak men and boys in July 1995 at Srebrenica, one of several Muslim enclaves which had been declared a UN safe haven, proved to be a watershed. International courts have since ruled that this bloody attack by Bosnian Serb forces was an act of genocide.
It was probably the biggest disgrace of the international community.
In the highly charged atmosphere following the fall of Srebrenica, an international conference was held in London on the 21st of July. Another eastern enclave, Žepa, had also come under attack, and it was feared that Gorazda would be next.
The threat was made to the Bosnian Serbs that if there was another attack on a safe area, then we, the nations, NATO, would bomb and continue to bomb until they stopped. For that reason, an operation had to be planned by NATO. This wasn't just an extension anymore of the no-fly zone or giving close air support. And we, the UN force on the ground, had to plan for this as well.
At the end of August, when what proved after investigation to be a Serb-fired mortar exploded in Sarajevo's Markale market, NATO airstrikes were called in. With the support of the international forces on the ground, NATO's 2-week air campaign helped lift the siege of Sarajevo and change the dynamics of the war. This paved the way for diplomatic negotiations and the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement on the 14th of December 1995. The peace settlement was very complex. Bosnia and Herzegovina was divided into 2 entities, the Bosnian Croat Federation and the Serb Republic. This led to significant population movements along the entity borderlines. Some 100,000 Serbs moved out, fearful for their future.
They were looting and burning their own houses just in order not to leave them to those who they saw as enemies at the time.
A high representative was appointed to oversee the implementation of civilian aspects of the peace agreement, and a NATO-led peacekeeping force was deployed to oversee the military aspects. The implementation force, IFOR, oversaw the end of hostilities, the transfer of territory, the cantonment of heavy weapons, and the process of demobilization.
We created a ZOS, ZOS, zone of separation, 10-kilometre wide, a demilitarized zone where no heavy weapons could be stationed. We had 60,000 troops, which meant that there was soldiers on every street corner.
Considering it was NATO's first ground mission, I think it was a tremendous success. These were NATO-led operations, obviously based on NATO infrastructure, but they involved nations from outside of NATO participating, including the Russian Federation.
IFOR was replaced by the 32,000-strong stabilization force, SFOR, in December 1996.
The implementation force, IFOR, was much more, I should say, combat forces heavy, whereas the SFOR, the stabilization force, was much more oriented to the task of stabilizing.
SFOR took on a broader range of tasks and worked closely with other international organizations, especially the Office of the High Representative, the OHR, to help create the conditions in which the country could rebuild. SFOR's new approach manifested itself in various ways. In 1997, SFOR took control of the transmission towers of Bosnian Serb television, which had been producing propaganda and hate speech.
SFOR provided support to OHR and the rest of the international community in, let's say, rearranging political environment in the country.
In the summer of 1997, the strong presence of SFOR troops in Banja Luka helped protect the moderate Bosnian Serb president Biljana Plavšić from hardline elements. A few years later, in 2001, SFOR was called on to raid a bank in Mostar, where funds were being misused to finance a move to establish a third separate Croat entity. SFOR also played a role in locating and arresting war crime suspects. National authorities were expected to hand over war crime suspects to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, but this was not happening at first. In July 1997, SFOR started snatch operations and over the next few years arrested 28 individuals and killed 2 who were resisting arrest. This helped break the cycle of impunity.
Bosnia moved into a new phase where for the first time people actually really started to talk about crimes that have been committed during the war.
By late 2008, of 161 persons indicted for war crimes, 159 had been brought to justice one way or another. The continued liberty and influence of individuals indicted for war crimes had been one of the greatest obstacles discouraging the return of refugees.
The security issue was the main issue for refugee returns.
You had to make sure that in the communities, in the entities, the people were received well and not harassed and be driven out once again.
After the first few years as the security situation improved, the rate of refugee returns increased.
Thanks to SFOR, 1 million people returned to their homes.
During the 9 years that NATO-led forces remained in Bosnia and Herzegovina, 43 different countries from Europe and around the world contributed peacekeepers. Troop numbers were reduced progressively from the original 60,000 to around 7,000. In December 2004, thanks to progress on the ground, NATO handed over the security operation to the European Union, but continued to support the operation with assets and capabilities.